Welcome to the second webinar, focused all on forages and soil carbon. And this is part of our three-part webinar related to our research project called Demonstration of Innovative Pasture Rejuvenation Practices in Central and Northern Interior of BC. I will be starting us off for the first half of our webinar, talking about soil carbon and forage production. And then I'm really excited to be joined by Sarah Bailiff, who is a Master of Science candidate at Thompson Rivers University, who's going to be sharing some of her research that she's doing with us here this evening. So very excited to have her joining us this evening. And without further ado, let's jump in. And I am your first presenter tonight, as I mentioned. I'm going to be spending the presentation tonight is all about soil carbon and forage production. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Serena Black. I have a lot of different work that I do with the BC Forage Council. Working on some of these research projects is one of them. I say I'm locally raised, and that's in reference to where this presentation, our research plots for this project are, which is in the Cariboo region, and I'm from the North Cariboo. What gives me the rights to be standing here and talking to you guys about soil carbon and forage? I have a very unique educational background. I have a Bachelor of Journalism that I completed at Carleton University in Ottawa before coming back to Northern BC and completing my Master of Science in the Natural Resource and Environmental Studies program at the University of Northern BC. And my master's project was focused on crop physiology, looking at breeding, responses to stress, particularly in grain, in barley. So a lot of my initial science training is all around crops. That's what makes me really excited. Towards the end of my master's project is when I started getting an introduction to soil science, and then really started seeing the two topics really integrating together, thinking about crop production and soil science. And I've continued on formal education in soil science as well. And I've been working in my current capacity as science research specialist at Industrial Forestry Service, which is a natural resource consulting company based in Prince George, since April of 2017. I sometimes feel that I walked through the doors yesterday, so it's kind of surprising to think of that I've been here for 4 years. It's a pretty great place to be. A lot of that work that I do is focused on research, looking at forage crops, horticulture, soil quality, climate change adaptation, which is bringing in my background from my Master of Science. But there's also this unique opportunity for me to focus on extension activities like webinars, field days, fact sheets, conferences, and workshops, and really making sure that the research that's being done is applied, but also gets used on the ground by the farmers and ranchers. So that's really where a lot of my niche is. Every once in a while, I still get to do some really fun work on the forestry side, jumping in some helicopters and doing some aerial surveys, but more and more, almost full time, I am focused on working within the agricultural sector. And my favorite thing to do is working directly with farmers and ranchers. So happy to have you guys joining tonight. So for my presentation today, I'm going to start very briefly talking about the research project and how it relates to soil carbon, the soil carbon sequestration question of our research. But I'm not here really to focus specifically on the really technical components of soil carbon. I'm not going to dive into the different ways of measurement, all those kind of aspects of soil carbon. What I want my presentation really to do is focus on why, as farmers and ranchers, as the audience, why you guys should care about soil carbon and how it impacts what you're doing on the ground. So I will be giving an overview of the carbon cycle before spending some pretty decent time looking at the soil organic matter, soil quality component of the project and kind of the questions that we're asking. Before opening it up to some questions, I will say from the start that while we've done some soil measurements, we haven't gotten the results back yet. So I'm not at a point in the research project where we can show you the specific results we've gotten from our research sites, but as I mentioned earlier, I'm excited to have Sarah joining us, who's going to be able to provide some data that she's finding from the region that's really going to help us really think about this in a deeper way. So the research project itself, we wouldn't be here without this great collaboration of funders. So we've been working with, we've received funding from the Climate and Agriculture Initiative of BC, the BC Forage Council, the Canadian Forage and Grassland Association, as well as the Northern Development Initiative Trust. So just from the onset, wanted to make sure that we acknowledge what's made it possible for all of this work and for all of us to be here tonight. And the project itself, we started at the very top, the demonstration of innovative pasture rejuvenation in the central and northern interior of BC. So the BC Forage Council, when it comes to looking at the soil carbon question, we have research plots throughout all of BC. And tonight we really are just focusing on the top 4, but the same principles of what I'm talking about also apply to the projects that we have in the Kootenay and Boundary region, as well as in the Okanagan. So always like to acknowledge that. Last Thursday, I did spend some time to provide a fairly detailed overview of what these 4 sites look like. If you have questions and want to get more information on the specific practices used, more information is available on the BC Forage Council website. But today I really do want to focus on the soil piece, which I promised to do last week. So what's really fun and unique about this project is it's actually linked to a national initiative looking at carbon sequestration in forage and grasslands. And this project is part of the Agriculture Greenhouse Gas Program, a project put together by the Canadian Forage and Grassland Association that really wanted to look at this concept of a national protocol for carbon sequestration. We see a lot of information about this in the news. I'm not going to spend a lot of time tonight on the policy, but I do want to make sure that everybody kind of has an understanding of that national piece, what information we're collecting on the ground and how it fits into what Canada is working towards. There we go. So CFGA identified 5 different production and management areas of practices that they wanted to trial. And so initially when this project got started, they were looking at the option of developing a measurement-based carbon sequestration protocol. Basically meaning you would go out, get a baseline carbon measurement of your soil, wait a handful of years, take a new measurement, and then see how much tons of carbon you were able to sequester, and that would be related to the amount of money paid back. So they identified these 5 different areas, and underneath each of these management areas, production and management areas, they identified 7 to 10 different practices that would be related, that they wanted us to, in each province, to go out and trial out. As it turned out, as we started talking to the members of the BC Forage Council, we got a pretty unanimous interest specifically in pasture rejuvenation, which actually fits underneath the first category that we have listed here, the advanced crop production systems for perennial and annual forages. And so we went with what the what our members asked for, what they were interested in. And underneath, as I mentioned, there was 7 to 10 different practices that we could be looking at. But all of our research sites really ended up looking at something along these 4 categories of looking at cover crops in an annual cropping system, grazed cover crops in an annual cropping system, and then no-till for either the annual forages or the perennial forages. So we got out, we got all excited. We identified all of our sites and we collected that first year of soil samples in year 1. And we sent them out for nutrient analysis, water holding capacity, as well as the total soil carbon, following the methods that they had developed for this national protocol. Since we did that initial study, the more we've learned about this very quickly changing literature about soil carbon, there's these additional analyses that we could be doing with our samples. So we are looking at those options to take back and do with the soil samples we collected in year 1, but also the soil samples that we're going to be collecting in year 3 as well. But as I mentioned, it's a pretty complex world of these different types of protocols. Partway through the national project that we had, we realized that having a measured protocol was going to have a lot of barriers and might not be something that could be put in place within the time frame of this project. So CFGA pivoted and successfully has launched the Canada Grassland Protocol. So this protocol provides guidance on how to quantify, monitor, report, and verify the greenhouse gas emission reductions when there's an avoided conversion of grassland to cropland. So instead of looking specifically at the management practices that we were trialing out, what this protocol does is it's looking for land that has potentially the threat of moving from a perennial forage system, a perennial grassland system, and to be converted into an annual crop system that might involve much more intensive tillage, much more release of soil carbon, but also potentially that higher economic piece for the producers that would encourage them to move to that system. So there's kind of a nuance and a shift that happened nationally. But at the end of the day, we were still able to collect these baseline samples for BC for the farm partners participating in the project. And now BC Forage Council is working on with our farm partners to assess their eligibility. They still might be able to apply to this protocol and take advantage of it. And so if you want more information on this, don't hesitate to reach out to me at any time. It's still a learning process for me, but if you want more specific information about the Grassland Protocol and kind of the components to it, I'd be happy to have that conversation or link you to the people who know the in and outs in a bit more detail than me. There's also the website. The protocol is being managed through the climateactionreserve.org. So lots of information if you want to head in that direction as well. But what I would say is this is one component to why we're seeing all this hype around carbon. But really what I wanted to talk about today and think about is, what does it really mean? Like what does this look like for you guys on the ground? And what are the other benefits of thinking about putting more carbon into our soil? And as I promised, I'm going to start with providing a bit of an overview of the carbon cycle. And really, all of this begins with photosynthesis, with thinking about that solar energy coming down. So as plants use the sunlight to pull the energy in, they're pulling carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, and they use that energy to grow. So they'll take the carbon dioxide, they'll release the oxygen, but they'll hold on to that carbon. And that carbon is then moved through the plants to the soil and feeding those soil organisms that carbon. And it's those organisms that are bringing nutrients back to the plants. So hopefully this diagram shows some of that. There's different ways carbon is entering the soil. So it is one of those components. We're seeing a lot of that carbon is moving into the soil, being exuded through the root exudates. But there's also the introduction of carbon coming in from the decomposing plant material itself. And then the soil organisms themselves that are feeding on the root exudates are part of that carbon piece that we're looking at. And so as those soil organisms are working and eating, just like humans, they're also respiring. They're also releasing some CO2 through respiration. So there is that cycle of how the carbon is moving through. So some of the carbon will be released back in, but some of it's going to be staying into the soil. And that's a very large overview of the carbon cycle and kind of what we're looking at, the opportunities of these plants to pull some of these greenhouse gases from the atmosphere and hold them tightly into the soil to help mitigate climate change. And as I move into talking about what all this carbon means to you, I'll be talking a lot about the soil organic matter. And I do think it's important to distinguish that soil organic matter is not the exact same thing as soil organic carbon. So soil organic matter is composed of a lot of different elements, including carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen. And so soil organic carbon is just one portion of that soil organic matter. But the ratio of how much carbon there is in that soil organic matter is pretty consistent. So a lot of the time, these two terms get interchanged, intermixed, but there's some nuance into thinking of those moving forward. So wanted to have that clarification. So we've seen these type of diagrams a lot before. I would say, thinking about soil quality, we're now realizing that we're looking at the physical, chemical, biological components of soil. So how does soil organic matter? What does that do for your soil quality? I'm going to start on what was really a pretty big shift for myself, thinking about soil and their traits were the physical traits of them and the physical benefits that more soil organic matter can provide for you. And the first is the more soil organic matter that you have, the higher the stronger you have, stronger aggregates you have. So it enhances aggregate stability. And so aggregates are those portions of the soils, the granules or clumps of soil that are made up partially of the minerals. So your sand, your silt, your clay, but then it's glued together by organic matter. So you can here's kind of an image that hopefully will help us along the way of what we're talking about when we say about those clumps. And it's a pretty important part to the structure and the stability of your soil. So if you have unstable aggregates, if you don't have enough soil organic matter, those clumps will break apart pretty easily. And it's going to not only potentially lead to some soil erosion, but it can also reduce your soil's ability to let water seep into the ground, and you'll get a lot of runoff. So that's kind of what we're seeing happening on this left-hand side. If you're not seeing those clear, good, stable chunks, the water has a hard time penetrating down and really enriching your soil with the moisture that it's looking at. Whereas on the right side, you can see if you have stronger aggregates, it's going to allow the water to move through the profile better and really reach the deep root, your deeper roots and hold on to it there. So the more organic matter you have, the more of that soil carbon that you have in your in the soil, the better your soil is going to be able to create these aggregates and to allow water to come through and not simply run off the surface. And so that's kind of where we talk about improving water infiltration, improving water holding capacity. And it's really doing this by creating these air pockets in your soil. And so you're also increasing your soil's ability to hold that water, not just have it move through, but actually hold it in. And so this really does work for whatever type of soil you're working with. If you have a sandy soil, the water might typically want to drain through really quickly. But if you are able to increase the organic matter that you have in your sandy soils, the more water you're going to be able to hold on to, so you don't have to water as frequently, or you're going to get more benefit of those rains that you do get. But on the other hand, if you have that really fine textured soil, you're going to have very small pore spaces in between, which will make it difficult for the water to seep through the profile. But if you have that organic matter that's going to take up and make those clumps, you're going to be improving the airspace and again, allowing that water to move through. So really, when we're talking about organic matter, regardless of the type of soil you're starting with, you're really looking for that enhanced aggregate stability and those physical benefits. That's going to make it easier to till, especially in those really, really sticky clay soils. But it's also going to reduce surface crusting, allowing for better seed beds, make sure we're getting started on the right foot. And the next piece of it is the chemical benefits. So this, I think we've covered a lot. We've known more about the chemical kind of components of soil quality for a long while now. I think a lot of the farmers, ranchers, they understand the chemical components a little bit better than these other sides of it. But really, when you think about what soil organic matter is doing to the chemistry of your soil, it's actually going to be able to increase your soil's cation exchange capacity. And this is the soil's ability to hold on to and supply essential nutrients to the plants. So there's going to be some basic level of cation exchange capacity your soil has based on the minerals that's there. But again, if you're able to adjust the soil organic matter, you're going to be able to increase that CEC and make sure that the nutrients are cycling through the system more effectively. But organic matter is also very important in helping your soil maintain its pH. So it's buffering capacity. And pH is something we're talking about all the time. In the Caribou, Highway 16, Kootenay boundaries, we're very aware of our soil pH and the potential limitations it might be leading to, whether certain nutrients aren't available unless it's in a certain pH range, as well as certain plants just won't thrive. You hear it all the time. Alfalfa doesn't like those acidic soils unless you breed specifically for that. But your pH really does impact the health of your plants and what you're able to grow. So once you're able to get a working pH that you're happy with, then using the soil organic matter to maintain it there, to keep it there, enhancing that buffering capacity is important. And again, it's the organic matter that's accelerating the decomposition of soil minerals, making more of these minerals available for plant intake. So I mentioned it before, organic matter is not just carbon. There's carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur, and they come up often in these pretty well-known ratios, the 100 of carbon to 10 nitrogen, 1 phosphorus, 1 sulfur. So having this organic matter in your soil being worked and dealt with the soil biology is going to increase the availability of these nutrients coming back to the plants, reducing the need for additional inputs in some of those ways. And possibly one of the newest pieces of soil science that we're learning about, the one that I'm seeing pop up in all the webinars, is talking about the soil food web, the biology, that life that's within our soils. And really, the soil organic matter is the food for those soil organisms. That's what they need to eat and thrive. So if you have very little amounts of soil organic matter, it's going to be harder to maintain that ecosystem underground and keep them going. And new research is also showing that the more food you have for them, the more organic matter, the different types of organic matter, you're enhancing your soil microbial biodiversity. You're increasing the different types of microbes and bugs and fungi that are in your soil. And this has actually been proven to help fight pests and disease. So having this diversity, having a lot of that going in, is actually going to be cycling around directly to the health of your plant. And your soil and these soil organisms, as they're eating, as they're moving around, they are enhancing the pore space, leading to those physical benefits that we've started with. So you can really see how all of these pieces are connected to each other and keep cycling around. So we started on this, coming back to where is all this carbon coming from? What does this mean? Why is it so nuanced? There are different ways that we're seeing, how can we put more carbon in the ground, really? How can we look at this? So carbon is being put in ground based off the residues, so that above ground materials that are left on the surface of the soil. And you'll see that on the left side of this diagram here. Pieces of decaying plants and animals, they come in. And this is what forms the small organic fragments that you're looking at. And this is actually what the recent research is showing as particulate organic matter. So this is the organic matter kind of tied into those residues, those above ground materials being put in. These are considered fast cycling. So this is where you're cycling through those nutrients, feeding your plants. The lifetime of this carbon is 1 to 50 years. And you can see the ratio of carbon to nitrogen is pretty high on the carbon. Now, what's interesting and what we're really excited about with forages is the opportunities for the root carbon, those root exudates that are going into the soil that we've talked about that are feeding those soil organisms. This is what grasslands, forage crops are really, really good at, is feeding those soil microbes. Then that actually gets put into this different pool of carbon, which they're referring to as the mineral associated organic matter. So really taking the carbon from those roots and putting them into those aggregates, holding on to them. It's slower cycling. it's going to stay in the soil for much longer, 10 to 1,000 years. And you see actually a little bit higher amount of nitrogen in that carbon to nitrogen ratio. So this is probably the more technical side of getting into the specifics of it. I couldn't help myself. This is what I'm really excited about learning. This is the type of analysis I want to do on the research plots that we have. But it's important to think about the fact that not all carbon is created equal. Not all types of carbon going into your soils are equal. And what does this really mean to forage production? The brass taxes of it is that the healthier soils will have more of the carbon, more of that organic matter. They will be more resilient to a changing climate. If your soils are better able to drain water or hold on to water, you're going to be better adapted to manage the going from a dry year to a wet year. And we're seeing those fluxes more and more frequently. High quality soils will have better nutrient cycling, better water management, and really is the foundation for a good, strong forage yield and quality. And you need good, strong forage yield and quality for your livestock if you want that healthy livestock and seeing those gains on the animals. It really does start with the forage, and the forage really does start at the soil. So what our research project is attempting to do for the central interior is trying to sort out what are the best management practices to do this. How can we get as much carbon into the soil, sequester that carbon into the soil? And to do that, it comes down to is you need a healthy plant. If your plants are suffering, you're not seeing the full potential of how much carbon can be going into the soil. So there's different ways to achieve this. I think this is the biggest lesson over the last few years that I've really come to, is that there's no one silver bullet. We really need to work individually with each farm, look at their assets, look at their resources, and figure out what we need to do to get really strong establishment so that we have long lasting stands that are continuously pulling this carbon out of the atmosphere and into our soils. And so potentially there's a lot of opportunities to use no-till methods, but maybe in some situations, depending on the soil, depending on the past history, you might need some initial tillage in order to get a good establishment in those strong, healthy plants. So every situation is different. I think that's very clear. And I'm sure every farmer and rancher are just smiling and nodding and being like, way to catch on. We've known this from the beginning. But hopefully at the end of our research project, we'll be able to provide some of the data and examples of what does and maybe doesn't work to get a really good establishment and healthy plants moving forward. I have relied heavily on a couple of different resources to put my presentation together. I'll make sure to share these with everybody in an email afterwards. If you're really interested in the whole soil carbon is not created equal, the first resource is just a phenomenal article that really does get into the nuts and bolts of soil carbon. I also pulled a lot of information from some Cornell University Extension fact sheets on soil organic matter. If you're really wanting to see some more specific information in the research done on that circle of different benefits. And once a student, always a student, I was happy to dust off some old textbooks from UNBC. So the soil microbiology, ecology, and biochemistry definitely led to this presentation this afternoon. So I'm really excited to be passing it, introducing our second speaker today. I heard Sarah present her research at the national conference as well as a provincial conference, and I couldn't help but beg and plead that she come to BC Forage Council and share the important work that she's doing with us. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to Sarah Bailiff for her presentation.
So hi everyone, as Serena said, my name is Sarah Bailiff. I'm currently a Master's of Science student at Thompson Rivers University, and this is a thesis-based program, so all about research. So I've got this great research project going on in the Chilcotin, which is looking at the potential for irrigation, fertilization, and mowing to increase plant productivity and soil carbon levels of perennial cropping systems. So Serena has kind of explained to you why the soil carbon is so important. So now my project is trying to look at how we actually will increase levels of soil carbon. And this project is actually located on my family's property that I grew up on. So it's very close to my heart. So I'm excited to share it with you all today. So as you're all aware, agricultural is a very important industry in British Columbia, and along with generating revenue for the economy, it also provides food for the population and creates many employment opportunities for citizens. And while these economic benefits are favorable, there still remain quite a few environmental concerns regarding agricultural practices, such as land degradation or greenhouse gas emissions. And ultimately, the agricultural industry is commonly critiqued for contributing to the problem of climate change. However, recently, agriculture can also be thought as a possible solution to this problem through the means of carbon sequestration. So Serena's already explained to you everything about this, but I'll just reiterate that carbon sequestration is when atmospheric carbon is taken up by photosynthesis and then stored within the plant material and eventually soil of the landscape. And this is important not only for helping combat greenhouse gas emissions, but is also important for crop productivity and forage quality. And so because it is so favorable to increase soil carbon, this is often a management goal of many agricultural practices. And one way to achieve this is to increase productivity, as plant productivity is positively correlated with levels of soil carbon sequestration. However, it's not really well known how each individual management techniques affects levels of soil carbon. And it's also not known how different types of crops in different climatic regions across the province respond to these practices. And so in order for the agricultural industry of our province to become sustainable, we must have a comprehensive understanding of how to best manage land throughout the province, including different types of crops in different types of climates throughout the region. So in regard to this idea, my study focus is on forage crops in the Chilcotin region. So the Chilcotin region is shown in this yellow region on the map here, and it's characterized by a short and dry growing season and is known for its production of beef cattle. So due to the climate, as well as the need to produce a lot of feed for livestock, a lot of the agricultural land in this region is utilized for the production of forage crops. And so this represents a large amount of land that has the potential for carbon sequestration. Within this area, irrigation, fertilization, and mowing are all commonly used in order to produce forage crops in the Chilcotin. So irrigation and fertilization are used to increase productivity, either by providing moisture and nutrients in order to provide sufficient crop growth throughout the short and dry growing season. And then mowing is often a necessity in order to harvest these crops so they can be stored for winter feed for livestock. So my project looks at these three management techniques and tries to answer the question of how these practices affect levels of plant productivity and soil carbon sequestration. So in order to answer this question, I have a study site located on Newton Ranch, which is located 136 kilometers west of Williams Lake. And my site is established on a field used for forage production, which is seeded with a blend of alfalfa, timothy, and clover, and thus represents a perennial cropping system. So perennial cropping systems are favorable for rates of carbon sequestration, as they have increased potential for storing carbon, as well as you don't have to till them every year, so they reduce the amount of disturbance and fossil fuel burning that comes along with tilling your land every year. So on my study site, I have these two enclosures, and one of the enclosures is located on a portion of the field that is actively irrigated and annually fertilized, while a second enclosure is located on a portion of the field that hasn't been actively irrigated or fertilized since 2004, when we implemented a center pivot sprinkler system and cut this portion of the field off from irrigation. So these two enclosures have had very different land management uses for the past 16 years, and this has allowed the soil and the plants time to respond to the difference in management practices. So comparing plant and soil characteristics between these two enclosures will allow us to kind of better understand the effects that irrigation and fertilization can have on plant productivity, soil characteristics, and ultimately rates of soil carbon sequestration. And then in order to examine the practice of mowing, I have organized the area of both of these enclosures into 2 by 2 meter plots, which you can see in the two photos here. And these plots will be subjected to different mowing treatments throughout the duration of my study, ranging from 0 to 30 centimeters in 5 centimeter increments, and including a control treatment, which plots will be left unmowed for the duration of my study. So throughout 2020 and the 2021 growing season, field data has and will be collected on above ground and below ground plant productivity, plant species diversity, forage quality, and soil chemical and physical characteristics. So just to give you an idea of what I completed throughout my first field season, in May of 2020, I completed my baseline soil sampling. So I took soil samples throughout both the irrigated and non-irrigated enclosures. And then shortly after that, I established my 2x2 meter plots and assigned each of them a mowing treatment that they would be subjected to for the duration of my study. And then in June, I took pre-mowing measurements. So this included taking vegetation surveys, height measurements, and biomass samples, which within all the study plots. And then I mowed them to their corresponding treatment heights for the first time. So this was done using a disc vine mower pulled behind a tractor, as you can see in the photo here. And the mower deck was just measured to the appropriate cutting height for each plot. So I have to give a special shout out to my dad for helping me with that, because he was quite handy at maneuvering between all the plots and not running any of them over. And then moving on to July, I took post-mowing vegetation height measurements. So this was just kind of used as a way to assess the amount of regrowth that had been happening since the mowing event happened. So this is just done by measuring from the base of the plant up to the tallest point. And then in August, again, I did the same pre-mowing measurements and mowed all the plots again to their treatment heights for a second time. In September, I took the post-mowing vegetation height measurements again, and then I did some root biomass sampling in order to assess below ground plant production. So I'll basically be completing the same methods throughout the 2021 field season as well. So along with examining irrigation, fertilization, and mowing, I also have a little side study that's attempting to quantify the effects of rodent and insect herbivory. And this is done by excluding these pests from certain plots. So in order to do so, I have created rodent exclusion fencing. So you can only imagine how difficult it's been to exclude rodents from an area on a hayfield. But I've dug these enclosures into the ground. So they're made of chicken wire that extends about 1 foot underneath the ground as well as 1 foot above. And then I've secured the tin flashing around the perimeter to make sure animals don't try to climb over it. And then I did some live trapping inside the plots to ensure that all animals had been removed. And then I placed these little track tunnels inside the plots as a way to monitor for rodent activity. So these are set up with a little ink pad and paper. So if a rodent enters the tunnel, it's going to get ink on its paws, and then it'll leave some footprints on the paper here. And so I check these every 2 weeks and make sure that there's no rodent activity occurring within these enclosed areas. And then I've been excluding insects by the biweekly application of an insecticide. So I've chose malathion as it targets some of the problem pests in the area, as well as kind of just a broad spectrum insecticide that would hopefully help to get rid of any insects that would be of concern. And then at the time of vegetation survey, I've just been monitoring the plants for signs of herbivory, and then just making a note of whether there is or isn't insect activity in these plots. So the idea with this objective here is to kind of compare vegetation characteristics between areas where these pests are present and where they're absent in order to determine if they're affecting crop production at all. So far, I haven't seen any real results from this objective, but it's only the first field season, and so who knows what will happen in 2021. Moving back, so this is just kind of an idea of what my site looks like after it's been mowed. So you can see the rest of the field has been mowed for crop production at the same time, and then my enclosure is a couple of wheel lengths of the pivot within the field. And so I have some of the plots are mowed right down to 0 centimeters. Some of the ones over here you can see are more moderate mowing heights. This one here is one of the control plots, which will be left unmowed for the duration of the study. And then back here are some of the pest exclusion plots with the rodent fencings installed. So it's pretty satisfying to me when it's all nicely tidied up and mowed and looks pretty cool compared to the rest of the field. So moving into some preliminary results. So I will have a whole nother set of data from 2021. So these are still just preliminary, and I'll just note that I haven't performed any statistical analyses on the figures that are shown here. So these are just kind of showing the general trends in the data, but there are definitely some interesting things going on. So just to explain these two figures here, these are both measures of above ground plant productivity. So along the x-axis are the different mowing treatments ranging from 0 centimeters, which would be mowing right down to the ground, and 30 centimeters, which would be leaving a 30 centimeter stubble height. The black bars represent treatments in the irrigated enclosure, and the gray bars represent treatments in the non-irrigated enclosure. And so this figure on the left here is the biomass harvested in grams per 0.25 meters squared at the June 2020 mowing event. So you can see that the highest amount of biomass is seen at the lowest mowing height. So this is to be expected because you're mowing right down to the ground. So obviously you're going to get higher amounts of biomass if you were leaving a higher stubble height. However, it starts to get interesting when you look at plant regrowth. So this is seen 1 month after mowing in July, and at the lower mowing heights, you're seeing the highest amount of plant regrowth. So even though you're mowing right down to the ground, you're still seeing the highest amount of regrowth after that 1 month mowing mark. And then for the August mowing, the figures basically look exactly the same. You're harvesting the most, again, at the lower mowing heights, and you're still seeing the highest amount of regrowth even in September when I took those 1 month post mowing measurements again. So just to highlight these trends here, you're definitely seeing higher productivity within the irrigated enclosure compared to the non-irrigated enclosure, which is again to be expected in regions such as Chilcotin, where the annual precipitation, at least during the summer, is quite low. And then again, you're seeing highest values of productivity at the lower mowing heights. And you can see that productivity tends to trend downwards as the mowing height increases. So as you increase your stubble height, you're harvesting less biomass and you're getting less regrowth. So moving on to below ground plant production. So as Mike's question was about the below ground plant production. So this is important because in forage crops, you often are harvesting all of the things. So you want all of the above ground biomass. So the important part of getting the carbon will rely on the roots. So this figure here again has the different mowing heights along the x-axis and irrigated black bars, non-irrigated gray bars, and then the below ground biomass. So it would be the mass of the dried roots, which I took from a 10 centimeter cube of soil from the top 10 centimeters of the soil. And then I dried the soil, picked all the roots out, which was a very laborious process, and then washed all the dirt off the roots, dried them a final time, and then weighed them to get the amount of root production. So it's kind of interesting here. You can see that again in the irrigated enclosure, you're seeing more root production. And then between mowing heights, you're not really seeing any difference in root production. So this is interesting because at those lower mowing heights, when you're getting the highest amount of above ground plant production, you're also seeing sufficient below ground plant production as well, which will be important when thinking of levels of soil organic matter and carbon sequestration. So again, this is just the first year of my study, and those plants and the roots could be taking a little bit to respond. So it'll be interesting to go back this year and take those root biomass samples again and see if we start seeing a treatment effect in regards to root production. So moving on to the soils, the big reason that many of you might be here, and soil carbon. So again, I'm still working on producing a lot of the analyses for my soil. So I'm currently working on looking at total carbon, but this figure here shows levels of soil organic matter. And again, I don't yet have a comparison across mowing treatments as I only have my baseline soils. So the only comparison I can show you today is between the irrigated and the non-irrigated enclosure. So this figure here shows that the irrigated enclosure has an average soil organic matter of 46.1%, while the non-irrigated enclosure has a slightly lower value of average soil organic matter at 36%. So these results suggest that irrigation and fertilization are favorable for levels of soil organic matter, and that they do have the potential to increase levels of soil carbon. So just to summarize the short amount or the small amount of results that I shared with you today, it does my results show that irrigation, fertilization, and mowing all can be used to increase levels of plant productivity as well as soil carbon, and that those lower mowing heights seem to result in the highest amount of above ground plant productivity and sufficient below ground productivity as well. Furthermore, this productivity can be increased by utilizing irrigation and fertilization. And these two measurement practices also can help to increase levels of soil organic matter. So overall, these preliminary results suggest that using a lower mowing height coupled with irrigation and fertilization would be favorable for levels of plant productivity and soil organic carbon levels, and ultimately would be the favorable management technique to use in this area. So as I said, I still have one more field season ahead of me. So this will allow me to complete my data set and provide more confidence in the preliminary results that I shared with you all today. So basically, we'll be doing the same thing that I did throughout 2020. However, I'll be performing a final harvest. So this will just be at the end of the growing season next year, or this coming year, I will be mowing everything right down to 0 centimeters. And this will allow us to get a cumulative above ground plant productivity comparison. So between those control plots, which haven't been mowed for 2 growing seasons, and then compare that to the amount of productivity we've seen that areas that have been mowed. And then we'll be doing below ground productivity again. So again, we'll be looking at how those roots have responded to 2 growing seasons of the mowing treatments. And then final soil sampling. So this will be, I'll be taking soil samples from within each individual plot, and this will allow me to analyze the soil characteristics between mowing treatments. So hopefully we'll be able to see some differences in soil characteristics there. However, soil is famous for taking quite a long time to respond. So we're not quite sure if we will see any differences there. However, it could be thought that because there are such drastic differences in above ground plant productivity, that this could correspond to levels of soil organic matter if the same measurement practices were maintained over time. So the main goal of my study is just to kind of better understand how irrigation, fertilization, and mowing can affect these plant and soil characteristics of forage crops in the Chilcotin. And I'm hopeful that the results produced from this project will kind of provide some information that will help producers make decisions when utilizing these techniques and allow for their land to be managed for optimum productivity and environmental sustainability. And better understanding how these management techniques affect the plant and soil characteristics of these perennial cropping systems can help the forage sector and the livestock sector of British Columbia maintain production while also combating their greenhouse gas emissions and reducing their environmental impact. With that, I'd like to thank you all for listening to me today. And thanks, Serena, for giving me the opportunity to present with you all today. And if you have any questions, you can always reach out to me via email, or I can answer some of them now.
Yeah, I just think it's so important that we have you doing this research in the Chilcotin, which is generally an area of the Cariboo where we don't have as much research happening in forages compared to other parts of BC. So yeah, just love to have you joining us.